Hi everyone, Materim here with another narrative battle report. And this has the Dwarves facing the Empire in a 2250 point Watchtower scenario. This narrative will actually pick up right after the last game that the Dwarves and the Vampire Counts faced, in which the Vampires succeeded in fooling the Dwarves into believing that the Empire had attacked them at night. To add further spice to this, the Dwarves are basically going for vengeance against what they see as the Empire's dishonorable tactics. So whoever wins this game will actually be able to place all of the terrain for the next game that these two armies will play that will represent the dwarves' attack on the actual city. So there is a decent amount riding on this, and let's go ahead and get right into the narrative. The savage, dishonorable attack the Dawi suffered during the previous night would not go unanswered. Seeing the wounded march back into camp with the dead would have destroyed the resolve of a lesser race, but not the bearded people. It only served to enrage them. The dwarfs gathered around a table discussing the plans of further attacks when they were interrupted by the sounds of heavy metal-clad bootsteps. "My king," the dwarfs in the room called out. King Agram nodded at their greeting and approached the two youngest of the assembled dwarves. "Gorin, Dorek, I have a mission for the two of you. At daybreak tomorrow you will strike the outer defenses of a city named Launingbrook ahead of our primary force." The king spoke, pointing to a spot on the weathered map. "My son, dismantle their watchtower. Leave no two stones atop one another." As Agram placed his hands upon his son's shoulders, he looked to Dorek and spoke one last time before he left them to assemble the Dawi. "Dorek, I leave you in command of this force. See that you strike a blow they will not soon forget. And when all is done, spare any who would surrender. Let them know they live only because we allow it." Death was coming to Launingbrook, and the dwarfs would be that death. So we find the dwarves of Clan Odhein attacking the guard tower of Launingbrook, facing only the hastily assembled defensive force of that city. And we'll start with the deployment of the Empire forces. Starting here on the left, you see they have a Hellfire volley or Hellblaster volley gun. Next to that is a unit of Inner Circle Knights, a total of 10 of them. Including in there is the General of the Empire, who is obviously on a barded warhorse with the Sword of Bloodshed, Talisman of Durance, and Potion of Foolhardiness. Next to that is an Imperial Great Cannon, and then a unit of 3 Demigryph Knights with full command. Next to that, you see there's a unit of 10 Empire Handgunners with a marksman who bears the Hawkland Long Rifle. The large unit next to that is a unit of 30 Halberdiers, which contains a warrior priest who has the Sword of Strife and the Iron Curse icon. Behind the handgunners is a unit of 5 archers who is a detachment of the halberdiers, and with them is the wizard lord, who is level 4 lore of metal with the channeling staff and the talisman of preservation. Next to that you see a unit of 20 greatswords, and the unit in between the two of those is a 5-man archer unit as well, which is a detachment of the greatsword unit. And with that is a second mage who is a battle wizard with level 2 from the lore of beast with a talisman of protection. And on the dwarf side, we start off with an organ gun with the rune of forging and the rune of accuracy on it. There is also a master engineer that is right near there. There is also a gyro bomber next to it. And then next to that is a unit of 20 Longbeards with shields, standard musician, and the Strolla's rune on their banner. Next to that is another unit of 20 Longbeards with great weapons. They have full command, the Stroller's rune on the banner, and the rune of Sanctuary. Next to that is a unit of 20 Hammerers with full command and the Master rune of Groth One Eye. And then there's a cannon with the rune of Forging. Now, his characters are split between these units, and to be totally honest, I'm having a little trouble telling which one it is. But continuing on, you see that he has a Rune Lord with the Anvil of Doom, the Master Rune of Balance, and 2 runes of Spellbreaking and a shield. And then he has a Gyrocopter with Vanguard at the far end. His other character he has is his BSB, which has the Master Rune of Grungy and the Rune of Strollers and the Great Weapon. And here you actually see he is throwing the V sign for Vanguard movement. As you can see, pretty much the entire dwarf force, except for the Anvil of Doom and the War Machines, take their full Vanguard so that they're within claiming space of the tower, since the Empire didn't actually have a small enough core unit to get in there. So, the dwarves get first turn because they're the attackers in the Watchtower scenario, even though the Empire forces didn't have anyone to claim the Watchtower, which was probably a little oversight, but I don't think the Empire player is that familiar with the Watchtower scenario, so it's understandable. So the first thing the dwarves did is move that hammer unit right into the tower. He put one guy inside of it and is just leaving the unit there so we know what's there. Next, he marches the gyrocopter right over the great swords to get behind their lines. And because he can't shoot after he marched, he went ahead and did his dive bomb attack, which looks like it peeled 3 great swords off the back of that unit. At least that's what it looks like from here. So definitely a good start, as that's an expensive unit and one that can actually do some pretty good damage to the dwarves. And I'm not entirely sure what this is showing now, but I may have just taken an extra picture here just to make it look good. So with nothing else going on in the dwarves' turn, his shooting was pretty much a wash. We go into the Empire's first turn, and it starts off with the Demigryph Knights doing a long bomb charge into the front of that Longbeards unit. I think they needed a 9 or a 10 to land it, but they did succeed in landing it, and I like that matchup. I think the Demigryphs are in good shape there. Over here, because of the shooting that was going on in the gyrocopter over there, you can see that his level 2 Mage of Beasts is getting the heck out of dodge and leaving that archer unit behind and going to hide over there. Don't know if that was the best idea, but at very least, if the gyrocopter is going to keep shooting that unit, it'll keep her safe for a little while at any rate. And the great swords went ahead and just ran straight at the tower there. Actually, I think I know what that second picture is now, because there's more great swords missing. I think that was showing where the cannon hit the great swords as well, and took off 3 or 4 of them, because it ended up being a pretty good hit. At least that's the thing that makes sense to me. So magic, he ends up getting, I want to say it was the Blades of Albion on the Demigryphs, so they only take 1 wound, but they only do about 3 back, so it really wasn't a great showing. Needless to say, though, the dwarves are stubborn with a reroll, so they're not really going anywhere during this combat. So dwarves turn 2 starts off with the other Longbeard unit charging into the side of the Demigryphs. and this is going to be a problem. That is the great sword or the great weapon unit, and they're going to have enough strength to put some pretty big holes into the armor of those demigryphs. So if I were the Empire player at this point, I'd start getting concerned right here. And then he moves the gyro bomber over the great swords and drops a bomb. I believe it scatters, might kill one or two, but it wasn't as effective as it otherwise could have been. Now you might be wondering, what happened to that big unit of knights and the Empire's general? That's a very good question, and thank you for paying attention. The Dwarven organ gun, to say the least, he ended up getting just enough to kill three, I believe it was three knights, which is just over 25% of that unit. The resulting panic check was made on a leadership 9 with no reroll because the BSB is on the other side of the table, and the Empire unit failed and fled off the table at bottom of or top of turn 2. So the Empire is without their leaders. And to add insult to injury, the dwarves, while suffering some more casualties, ended up just doing a ridiculous number of wounds to the demigryphs, and the demigryphs broke now that they no longer had the leadership of their general, and were run down by the dwarves, who end up in the position you see them. And I think that the dwarves lost something like 8 men for it. So we go into Empire turn 2, and having really nothing else to do, the great swords, led by the BSB, go charging at the dwarven hammerers. This is going to be a bloody fight. I mean, both of them are always strikes last, with the exception of, I think, the Empire BSB. But the dwarves are getting about twice as many attacks as the humans are. Now, as if things couldn't go any worse for the Empire player, during shooting, he rolls triple misfires on his Hellblaster volley gun, shooting at that unit of Longbeards. So it's going to do 30 attacks and then blow up. And out of the 30 attacks, he ends up netting a measly 4 wounds out of it, which isn't even enough to have made them panic if they were going to. And then we go into combat. Magic, he got a few buff spells off. I think he got Wissons and something else off. Maybe the Blades of Albion. And he did some decent wounds into the Hammerers. But as you can see, the Hammerers, with I think it's 23 attacks from 10 guys, just decimated that unit. I think there's 4 Great Swords and the BSB left at this point. So we go into Dwarf turn 3. And the dwarves over here just turn around so they can come mix it back up. That unit of Longbeards with the shields on them that's over near the organ gun are basically going to be out of the fight all game because they're just too far from anything to get to it with the dwarfs' kind of crappy 3 movement. And then he ends up going over the... This might be... I don't remember. He ended up doing a lot of damage. This may be combined from the gyro bomber laying a bomb on the halberdiers unit plus the organ gun. But they just opened up on it and basically took out half of the halberdier unit at one go, which ended up they held, and yeah, that must have been just from the bomber, because I think this is the shot where the organ gun tried shooting the archers to get rid of the metal mage that's over there. So fairly unsuccessfully, sad to say. So then we go into Dwarfs turn, Empire turn 3. And since there's very little left of the great swords at this point, The Empire player decides he's going to charge his relatively depleted unit of halberdiers into things and see if they fare any better. Um, my gut says no. And as you can see, my gut is right. Basically, the halberdier unit gets destroyed down to two people. I think it's the might even be the champion and just one random guy that's left there. But yeah, um, they end up taking out a few more hammerers, but it's really any chance the Empire player had to win this game now is pretty much over. And then on Dwarf turn 4, to add insult to injury, he slams into the side. Oh, I know what's left here. The Battle Priest is still in that unit. So he slams here into the flank of the last remaining man of the unit and the Battle Priest there. And he's planning on just crushing them with these great weapon wielding dwarves. Even in best case scenario, this would be a rough fight. And so then to add insult to injury, during movement he moved the gyrocopter over here, and during shooting just laid down a flame template to peel off all but one greatsword and the BSB out of the unit of greatswords. So there's very little left there as well. I think at this point the Empire's only got something like 6 models on the whole of the board. So during combat, obviously the dwarves crush that one remaining champion out of that unit, and because that's all they can do damage to. I think he challenged him. The battle priest ends up breaking and running behind this unit. The dwarves tried to pursue and end up slamming into the side of the great swords, which, as you can remember, is only a single great sword in the BSB at this point. So then we go into Empire turn 4, and the Battle Priest rallies. The Empire throws 5 archers into the flank of the Dwarf Longbeards at this point, because why the hell not? This game's pretty much been over for a turn and a half by now. Figuring maybe he can kill another dwarf or two. And here the BSB is killed, as are 2 archers, but they do manage to kill one of the dwarves. And keep in mind, it wasn't the BSB that killed a dwarf. It wasn't the greatsword. It actually was the archers slamming into the flank that did it. So if nothing else, the archers of Launenbrook have proven themselves to be a rather stout force. They just need to be more of them. And after they broke, the archers actually held, and the dwarves, or the great sword ended up breaking, which frankly doesn't much matter. Like I said, the game's been over for a while, and the Empire player rolled the die at the end of turn 4 and rolled a 6, so mercifully the game ends here. The sounds of battle faded as General Nadine made his way back from the small watchtower at the outskirts of the city to his command post within Launenbrook. People of the small city had begun to come out of their houses at the sound of gunfire and screams. Seeing their leader come through town with his knight entourage did not quell the waves of anxiety that were now sweeping over the community. "Mitos!" the general shouted to the guards standing atop the small building which housed the town's leadership. "Ring the warning bell. Gather all the militia and send someone to retrieve our other patrols. We're under attack by blasted dwarves." Mitos immediately began ringing the warning bell, causing a full-blown panic within the city. People ran into their houses and barred the doors and windows. Adults and young men began gathering bows and arrows and small handguns, and anything else they could use as weapons. Nadine had never fought dwarves before. He was unaware of the hardened defenses of the bearded folk, and that they actually had access to magic. He was caught with his pants down once. Not again. "Anthony, go to the Tower of Wizards. Tell Grundor the Blaze that he and his allies' services will be needed immediately." The young squire ran off to gather the wizards. The dwarves are slow, but they are well organized, he mumbled to himself. They have the upper hand in this. Why in Sigmar's name have they attacked us? Perhaps the heretic who provided the dwarves with magic is responsible, spoke a voice from the far corner of the office. A witch hunter moved out of the shadows and stood before the general. I believe it could be of an undead source. Gunter, have you gone mad? There are no dead around here other than our own people. General, there are heretics all around these lands. Some new, some old, and some very old. I found this. Gunter tossed a small piece of cloth on the table. Had a small symbol on it. Do you recognize the symbol? The general stared for a moment and turned back to the witch hunter. No, and I don't have time for your games. This cloth is old. Very old. I found it when I went to investigate a report of a disturbance several miles from here. It was found within the remains of partially burned bodies. Bodies that wore the color of our armies. But what few faces I did manage to see were, well, let's just say not particularly human. This particular cloth shows the symbol of House Mounthaven. It appears that the former owner of those lands still lives. Or perhaps lives again. The general stared at the witch hunter for a moment. Gunter was a very driven man, bordering on obsessive, but he was well studied in his area of expertise. If there was a hint of truth in what he had said, the situation went from bad to worse. Find out if this is true. Do not engage the dwarves directly. Bring me evidence of this, and perhaps, somehow, we can prevent more slaughter. As you command, Gunter said, moving back towards the rear door of the building and into the night. There's nothing I love more than watching a great game of Warhammer that really comes down to the skill level of both players matching their tactical wits against each other. Unfortunately, that was not this kind of game. I think this was one of those kind of games where the dice just totally go AWOL on one player, and it makes what could have been an interesting and challenging battle into just a massacre. I don't think that the Empire player made any mistakes, with the possible exception of not having someone to start in the Watchtower. But again, I'm chalking that up more to the fact that that particular player doesn't actually even own his own copy of the rulebook. So he didn't realize that you were limited to 20-man core unit in there. So that being the case, but even that could have been compensated for with just some small modicum of dice luck. And we sat around talking about it after the game was over, and the thought was that this match was pretty much lost by that botched leadership check that ran the general and the knights off the table. It really did not help matters that big a hunk of points was gone, and that was really the unit that he was planning on using to keep some of the support units back and to run some early victories from the smaller units, and without that there really wasn't much to go on. The fact that the Hellblaster then immediately blew up with 3 straight misfires and only inflicted 4 wounds didn't help much either. Really, I think the star for the Empire was the greatswords, because they did do a lot of damage. I mean, by the end of it, there was only 5 or 6 of the hammerers left. Unfortunately, those hammerers each getting 2 attacks, the greatswords just can't handle it. I mean, we were doing the math. He was sending his BSB, the champion, and 9 hammerers in against 10 greatswords, or 9 greatswords in their champion. So the greatswords were getting like 11 attacks. The hammerers were getting 23 attacks, and it's hard to deal with that. I think the hammerers are a great army to use as a defender in the Watchtower. They're really really hard to move, and there's not a whole lot that's going to be able to bring as many attacks to bear as they can. So I think it was a hard fight. Um, I think it went the sort of the right way for the narrative, since we're basically playing that the people of Loningbrook were not expecting the dwarves to just go ape shit and attack them. So I think that makes sense, but it definitely didn't lead for a fun game. I know the Empire player, because he had just finished playing against me in the last narrative battle we did. He was the Dark Elf player, so he kind of got his head held underwater in one game, and then immediately, not 10 minutes later, turned around and got the same treatment from the dwarves. So I know it was rough. I definitely think the dwarf players list is becoming a lot better. He's trusting a little less in his characters and building more into his units. Although, for the life of me, I have no idea why he wanted to try the Anvil of Doom. I mean, it did. I think he got one magic blast into the Great Swords that did some significant amount, but for the most part, I'm just not terribly impressed with it. For the points you get, 3 bound spells is not really going to do all that much. And it's, what, like 170 some odd points plus the Rune Lord that you have to put it on. So, all in all, I don't think I would play with it, but that's why we have different dwarf players. But I definitely think, like I said, the hammers were great. The gyro bomber and the gyrocopter were doing great, just huge amounts of damage to the halberdiers and the great swords. So they definitely paid for it. And I definitely think that him throwing the Strola's rune on all of his units basically surprised the hell out of the Empire player. Because I think when they first sat down and he was told that he couldn't put anything in the Watchtower to start off with, I don't think he was very concerned, because his units were going to move faster. He was going to be able to get into the Watchtower before the dwarves. And then all of a sudden, it's like Vanguard and everything but the War Machines moved up. Really just caught the Empire player by surprise. But all in all, hope you guys enjoyed the the battle report, perhaps more than the players enjoyed playing the game. But if you like what you saw, please subscribe, like the video below, and again, thanks. If you have any comments, please leave them below, and we will catch you next time.